This one today is not going to be super deep. We may even finish early. This GOTV is so important, and I'm sure everybody here knows it means get out the vote. I'll just say it in case somebody doesn't. And getting out the vote is super important this time. It's important every time, but this time, we could lose democracy if we don't get out enough voters. So it's pretty important. And the problem is, in this election cycle, we can't deploy some of our most effective field activities. We can't go door knock. Not that everyone's following the rule, but many Democrats are. And that means that what we can do, we must do exceptionally well. And we've been talking about the psychology of persuasion, but getting out the vote is simply providing voter information and then encouraging people to vote. It's very different than persuasion. It's a place where more and more of your volunteers can be part of it. And again, I think psychology can help us be more effective at GOTV than we've been in the past. 3 quick non-psychology pointers about GOTV, and that would be universe, data, and contact. And in your universe, and Jason knows this being a candidate, but and I'm sure the rest of you know quite a bit about it, but ideally, a week or so before Election Day, you have a good handle on your voters, and you can identify the people that you believe you persuaded, plus the strong Dems and leaning Dems. And then if this is short of your win number, then you want to look at adding the drop-off Dems and maybe potential persuadables that you didn't get to. And then lastly, undecideds. And then in some cases, anyone who'll answer the door. I remember in 2004, they sent us out in North Minneapolis, just go knock on any door. Just go knock on doors and tell people to go vote. They didn't even, there were no walk sheets. But now, of course, this year, because there's early voting, we also want to make sure that we track people who have early voted, move them out of our GOT universe so you don't waste time contacting them again. And then the question, have you voted, becomes really important, especially now, in order to be able to do that with our lists. Now, once early voting begins, luckily, most voters will tell you right up front if they've already voted. So that's kind of handy. For data, if you're not already, if you're a candidate or a staffer, you should be using the VAN. It's very important that if you ID voters and update voter information, it's really a multi-cycle process. And if you don't add the data, then the quality of the data goes down for all other candidates now and into the future. And vice versa, the data collected by all previous candidates helps you. And I know it's tough, and I know the VAN has not been, it's not always held in high regard, but it is our national database, and it is the place where we have most of our information. And if you know how to use it as a candidate, you can protect your volunteer list, your donor list, things of that sort. And then the last is contact, and the goal for GOTV is at least 3 contacts, with the last one being the day or so before the election. So those are just some quick pointers about it that I just thought worth mentioning. So when we, how do we do GOTV messaging? And there are really 2 main components to this. One is the voting info, and another one is motivation, which we were talking about earlier. And so your message must include information on voting. The VAN will give you all the information you need. It'll give you each voter's voting or polling place, the times, the dates, and locations. And this info is also available at the Secretary of State and the DFL websites. So it's really important when we're doing GOTV that we tell people where to go and how to do it. That's super important. And that may include all sorts of things. Are you registered? And, how do I know if I'm registered? And at some point here, Lisa will put some links in there for you for those things. But you want to do that. And then, of course, the second part of it is motivation. Basically, it's the psychology behind what we're doing. And normally, in a normal year, a normal cycle, we persuade up until the week or so before an election, and then we do GOTV. And this just isn't our new reality with COVID, and also now with early voting and vote by mail. And so what that means is persuasion and GOTV overlap. And this is really uncharted territory for us. I did a bunch of looking around at the research on GOTV. One interesting tidbit was that the research shows that combining persuasion and GOTV is less effective in combination than they are separately. So just thought that was important to state. And the psychology on this is it's still in process. It's newer. It's a newer part of psychology, and there has been research done, but some of it is contested. And so what I gleaned from the stuff that I checked into was that, my own opinion, based on what I've seen, is that once we know people are voting our way, we have to immediately have a GOTV conversation with them if we're going to overcome the voter suppression tactics from the GOP and the post office. That's something I think we have to do. But lastly, no matter what, in the last week or so before the election, it has to be GOTV only. We have to split persuasion off and just really go for it. At least this is what we're hearing from the experts. That seems to be my experience too out in the field, that in that last week, getting people to the polls is the most important thing that benefits us. What are the messaging components? Well, messages about the act of voting have been shown to be effective. So in general, your message should focus on voting as a behavior rather than a message about a specific candidate. This is for GOTV. So, for example, will you be a voter on election day is better than can we count on your vote for Bill Smith, or count on you to vote for Bill Smith on election day. It's, this is some of the research that's come out. In fact, some of it suggests that including the candidates with the GOTV message is no more effective than not contacting voters at all, which I found surprising. So, again, this is still all being worked out now, but that's at least what we're hearing. So, first thing you want to do is, or one thing that you want to do when you want to try to get people to go and motivate them to get out and vote, is ask people why they value voting. So you're assuming that they do, and ask people why they value it. Because it places voting in a moral dimension. And moral frames are deep, fundamental frames, and they light up more brain cells, and they're going to have a greater impact on behavior. So I think that's something you can do. And this is also something you can put up on the wall by your texters or your phone bankers. And then ask them to talk about their plan for voting, because that paints a picture in their mind. They actually, they think of themselves physically carrying out the steps to vote. And when, where, and how they get there and what they'll be doing beforehand really helps that picture become a mental rehearsal. Then that actually activates motor parts of the brain. So this unconsciously strengthens the likelihood that they'll vote. That, I know, is consistent with what we know about people imagining and rehearsing and role-playing. So if you get somebody to do that, it just helps them think, at least in advance, about that they are going to have to make time to vote on voting day, if that's when they're going to do it. These last two are very similar. One is get voters to say they will vote. And some of you, probably all of you, know about the theory of cognitive dissonance, which in its original form was that your beliefs and your actions, if they don't line up with each other, then there's dissonance, which I kind of like, because dissonance in music is two notes that do not belong together, and boy, you hear it, and it feels bad. It's the same thing here. Much of it, if not most of it, is unconscious. But in this case, if you get somebody to say that they will vote, then there's a dissonance because they haven't voted yet, and they know they have to do it, and that dissonance will remain until their actions come in line with their verbal commitment. And since the mind and body seeks to reduce the dissonance, that person will vote in order to relieve that tension. And like I say, much of behavior and motivation is unconscious. So it's worth it. That I know is very consistent with psychology going back 50 years. This last one is a kind of a riff on that deal, which is asking voters to make a pledge to vote. I've seen these rarely, but when they've come through, it's generally a card, and either a door knocker will carry it. I think we did this in 2016. Maybe it was 2008. And the card just says, "I pledge to vote." There's a signature line, and you get the voter to sign the card. And it's hokey, and everybody's chuckling and laughing, but they sign the card. And they say, again, it's because of cognitive dissonance. It's also, and this is esoteric psychology, but there is a theory that no learning takes place without muscle movement, which sounds absolutely incredible. And the science is there to back it up. So actually getting somebody to sign helps an awful lot. It really nails down that commitment that they've done. And signing is also something you do on contracts, and that you put your name on a check. So it's a more official thing. It generally, when you sign something, you're almost always making a commitment, and it's an important commitment. So that also falls in line with what we know about psychology. So before I move to the next section, are there any questions on that?
George, I had one question. Imagine that Democrats had a base of voters that voted more frequently and in general than Republicans. So I think the get out the vote works to say, get them out for this election. But then the question is, what do we do in between, or what do we do once they've voted? Yeah. Because if I say to you, and I don't know if your muscle memory sticks or whatever, but if I send you a note of gratitude, thank you so much, George, for voting. We are proud that you've exercised your American right, and praise you in the process. Does that light up anything that might cause you to vote the next time?
I think so. From what I've read and research is that can be helpful. It has to be done in the right way, I think, because in fact we'll get to this in the next section real quick. But I think let's hold that for a second, and then we'll get there real quick, because we'll address that. Any other questions, comments? Want to hurl tomatoes? All right.
I have a comment. My hand was up.
Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. Two things real quick about the cards. We used the sign the card method all over Iowa before the Iowa caucuses for 6 months, and it worked really well. I pledged to go to Iowa caucuses and participate, basically. So that worked really well. The other thing is, George, do you remember the Vote Now signs, blue signs that were all over the metro and beyond, going back from 6 years ago, back further than that? I haven't seen them more recently than that. Do you remember those? Yeah,
I remember seeing them, and then I actually forgot that they were around.
Yeah,
I haven't seen them either.
Looking for anyway. Last Friday, first day of voting, a friend of mine and I did some visibility on University and 35W, and I was able to get one of the Vote Now signs, which is obviously a nonpartisan sign. Just as Vote Now, it's blue, it's very easy to read. That's it. That's the message. Mm-hmm. Get your ass over there and vote. Having only one sign, I gave him a Biden-Harris sign. And he went over to the northbound traffic, and I went to the southbound traffic, and we were there on University and 35W for several hours, and he got about 80-85% agreement, support, honking, waving, comments, whatever it is, but he got a number of go to hells and thumbs down and whatever it is, because his message was different. I, on the opposite street corner, had a rather nonpartisan sign. I got one thumbs down, period, and all the others that communicated in any way, shape, or form were positive. So I'm a big proponent of the nonpartisan type message to get out the vote, because I was just saying, vote. Does that,
Yeah, I
does that
mean,
mean to you?
well, and that's almost the essence of get out the vote, because we know that, or at least it turns out that when more people vote, Democrats do better. So even if your sign, tickled some Republicans to go early vote, I still think you may have gotten folks who would not have thought about going right now, or didn't know that what was it, Friday was first day, whatever it was, the 18th. So that's I think so, and that's why actually so many of the things that I read on this were about the GOTV. Basically, the most important thing was telling people where they vote. That having that information alone is very powerful and helps them a lot. Yeah, makes sense. And Lisa and I were out on, what was it, Friday?
Yeah, we were Friday too.
Friday, we were out on the bridge too, and it was interesting. We had some Trump people saw us, went home and one guy got a
Trump
flag, a couple of friends, and brought their Trump flag, and all
It
that
messed
stuff.
up our stats. We couldn't tell who people were honking for then. The only way we knew for sure is when we heard people screaming out, which we did. F Trump. So we, but otherwise it was hard to tell who they were honking for when the Trump people showed up.
Well, I didn't care. There was some guy stopped, and right under where we were standing was a walking bridge, and he's looking up and he's giving me the finger, and I'm going, Biden, yeah, and he's no, I mean Trump, and I'm going, yeah, all right, Biden, and people are honking horns, so we looked happy and jumping up and down like, yes, everything's cool, and so anyway.
I have one other
digress.
Follow-up, and this is something we used in the midterms 2 years ago, where we were able to take back not only the Minnesota House, but the U.S. House. And that was going back to 2016 relative to get out the vote, that the largest reason that people in my world cite that we lost in 2016 was enough Dems stayed home. It was a GOTV issue. Yeah. So in 2018, we were saying in 32 different ways why staying home doesn't work, can't work. You have to show up. You have to be heard. Or look what just happened.
Right.
So whether it's a factual or a guilt or pick one, I don't know. We used stay at home 2016 in 2018, and it worked. So what I'm saying, George, is here we are again, aren't we?
Yep. We are.
We already know what happens if we stay home.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'm hoping we get that.
I'm
hoping that message still resonates, and that we're using that when we go out and talk to people, because, if they weren't convinced in 2016 that Trump is a danger, they probably ought to be now. We'll see. But okay, well, let's move on to the next part here. This is, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. Knowing why people vote can help us understand what to say. And there are techniques, and but I would almost say that the word technique, I would say, might be otherwise called motivators. And so identity being a huge one. And the article I got this from talked about a current identity and a desirable identity. I won't get into that. It's basically people aspire to maybe be better than they are, or be able to claim a more desirable identity. One of which can be, I'm a voter, as opposed to I'm not a voter. We all know people who don't vote supposedly on principle, but many people want to be a voter. So this nice chart here. Do is be a voter is better than go vote, and because it talks about who that person is. And then the why it works part of it, people are not currently voters and want to be, or people are already voters and don't want to lose that status. So I think I'm sure there's a lot more in identity tied up, but that's a great way to think about what's going on. Also, social norms, and I think there's some things we can do with this here in Minnesota that may work better than other states. But by highlighting the prevailing behavior of other people, people become motivated to do as the others do, kind of the bandwagon thing, get on the bandwagon. And you can say everyone is voting, you should too. I think in Minnesota, which tends to have some of the highest voter turnout in the country, and CD3 in Minnesota having the highest voter turnout and the highest voter contract in the entire country, that's something we can say to people. Were you aware that here in the West Metro or here in Minnesota, more people vote in Minnesota? Minnesotans are voters. Will you be a voter? That kind of thing. And that's better than in some cases the message that not a lot of people are voting, but you should. Now, I think, as Ron said, you can get that to work maybe with people who are pretty solid Dems who stayed home, and you can get them into thinking that they ought to get out because they really owe it to themselves and everybody else, and that can work. You do want to avoid doing this in a way that might shame them, maybe too overtly. And
So George,
yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt if you had, but I had a point to make. The get out the vote, in this case, identity or social norms from a messaging standpoint, seems to be generic. In other words, I might be calling somebody, I might be standing on a bridge. I know a couple of organizations that are experimenting with apps that actually you can use your own phone list. And the idea is then that if you're on my phone list, George.
Hope you
Oh,
cut
you
out
cut
there.
out, Hobie.
Oh,
Try
right.
again, because I just heard your O.
okay. So that this is an app that addresses my phone list. And if you're on my phone list, George, it will actually, I call you and we have a different relationship. We are our identity is related to how we know each other, not in some general generic sense, but the app will then track the fact that I have called you, and it increases, the idea is to increase the obligation because it's happening on a personal basis rather than just a person-to-person basis. It's obviously person, but it's personal. I don't know if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
it's the difference between identity at a high level in a database and then using your own personal database to actually get out the vote.
Well, and assuming these they wouldn't be on your list if they weren't friends or otherwise had some regard for you and respect. I can't imagine a more powerful way to get people motivated to go out and vote, especially because they know they might see you again someday, and you might ask them if they did, and so that helps. Yeah, I think that's great. I didn't put that in here, or it's not in this chart, and I think that's great. There was reading about that some of the most effective GOTV is having people call 3 of their friends. I like your thing better. Just do the whole list. And you're saying there's an app for this, or they're experimenting with it?
I'll identify it. MN350 Action is using it. I don't know how well it's working, but it sort of gives you a goal because the goal was to contact 30 of your associates, friends, acquaintances, family.
Yeah.
And it tracks that, and then it allows you to follow up, and it centralizes the information in the database so that you can get some idea of the number of people that have actually been contacted or responded positively.
That's brilliant. Some of the technology is really fitting in with psychology too, which is really cool. I'm glad to see that happening. Oh, there's Virginia.
Hi, Virginia.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
All right. We're going to move to the next slide, so just take a look at that. Here are a couple of others, and it's kind of what we were kind of in there, the idea of social pressure, and and this we talked, Jason, I think it was you and I talked about this at some point, the idea that, we'll know if you voted kind of thing. Maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was somebody
I
else.
don't know
But
if that was.
yeah, this is the idea that, and I've seen this before, the idea that you talk to somebody and tell them that the public records on voting, or the records on voting, are public records. And, and thank you for voting last year, I think is just fine. And as opposed to if you voted before, you know how important it is, which is a good thing to say, but should not be said at the exclusion of thanking somebody for their vote last year, because you've identified them now as a voter, their identity as a voter, and they're people are more likely to vote when they know their behavior will be public. The only thing that I have to say about that is many people don't respond that way, or don't respond positively to that. A lot of people don't know that the fact that they have voted is public. And some people, they don't know that it's just the fact that they voted. It's not who they voted for. However, if you voted in a primary, the information that you voted for a Democratic candidate or a Republican candidate does leave the Secretary of State's office. It goes to the parties. And that's supposed to be the only place it goes. But as you know, it's in the van. All the candidates can see it. And once information's out, it's out. So some people might find it creepy. And so I think it's important that if you're going to do the social pressure thing, make an appeal based on their pride in voting or voting like other people, so that you're less likely to give people the creeps. Does that make any sense? That's how it feels to me. And so it is something that can work, though, but I don't like that there's an implicit threat there, like, well, if you don't vote, we're going to know it and we're going to call you. And that not so good. Another one is commitment and consistency. And by getting somebody to make a commitment, we pretty much talked about this. Please sign the card, please, or will you be a voter? And when people give their word, they'll do something, they're more inclined to actually do it. So, and then gratitude. This is, again, kind of thank you for being an informed voter. Kind of thanks them for an action that they've done. And people find being praised for their actions validating about their social worth or social value of their contributions. And so I'm not sure that this last one is always applicable if you have time for it in GOTV, but it is certainly something to think about. And so, kind of in conclusion, there are some of the conclusions of the research that I've looked into and that I presented here is still open. But what I see running through all of it is very consistent with other psychological research, that some of which we've been exploring in these webinars. Getting voters to focus on their commitments and their plan for voting makes it more likely that they will consciously or unconsciously avoid cognitive dissonance and vote. And I also think it builds into the voters an ongoing identity of being a proud voter, somebody who contributes to this process. So, and I think anytime we can do that and have the voter think of themselves as a voter and that it's something good to be, something they can be proud of, I think we'll get some of those drop-offs who aren't voting to get off their butts and do it. So Lisa is going to put, or has put into,
I have put.
yeah, she put links in there. And both Minnesota Secretary of State, the website there is excellent. I thought of many questions and went there looking for answers and found them and much more. So that's really good. The DFL has a version of that, which are probably it looks like the top 6 or 7 categories of information that people are looking for. So that's also worth checking out. Something that I found at a place called ballotready.org is a sample ballot. You can go and punch in your address and it'll tell you what congressional district. It's like the poll finders we have, but it'll show you your candidates and give you a sample, basically a sample ballot. Now it also includes the Republicans. So I don't know that I'd want to give that to everybody. But this also brings up the idea that the sample ballot, which we use, and I think Leah knows this, in Brooklyn Park, in our area, we've used in SD40, we make up a little card. It's just a small, you can put it in your hand. It's also small enough, and I don't have one here, but it's just about, can't get it up there. It's about that big. There we go.
Postcard sized.
Postcard size, maybe a little smaller, and it is the sample ballot. And what we were doing is we'd take a picture of it. I mean, we'd hand it out for door knocking, but for the phone bankers took a picture of it and texted it to people. And now through text, which I did try, Jason, and I did for Dean Phillips, and as soon as I hear back from Tom what a good date will be, I'll go ahead and he did contact me. He said he'll get me info, and I'll do it for you. But that's perfect. If we do your own text, being able to take a picture of a sample ballot for GOTV and sending that out, that's so important because, like when I sit there in phone bank and I talk to people and I say, can we count on your support for Dean Phillips? And they go, oh, yes, I like Dean Phillips. Oh, can we count on your support for the rest of the Democrats? And they don't know all the Democrats. I don't know all the Democrats. I bring something with me for the judges and for other down ballot races. Yes, Jason.
One thing we did use as a strategy, I think we were doing sort of an email campaign as well, and it's a pro mail-in ballot, which is get your mail-in ballot now. Study this thing. There are probably 100 names on this thing just about. And that way you're not going to go into the polls November 3rd and go, okay, I know this person and this person. I don't know any of these other people.
It's
a really good advocation for getting your ballot early because you can sit there, look it over, Google every single person up and down, and be much more prepared to when you submit it than you would be just walking in kind of with, probably the federal and maybe one person in your district on your mind.
That's a great idea. Using the mail-in ballot as your sample ballot.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I'm going to put that in. I just wrote it down and I'm even going to bold it. That's great. So, yeah, and then there's also the poll finders, and the DFL has one, the Minnesota Secretary of State does. And then the other thing that I think it's important for all of us to know is the Dfl Lawyers Committee, which I think will be the folks who will head up the reporting that needs to happen. So if you're at a polling place and something is happening, I think these are the ones who are sitting on the other end of the voting hotline for the DFL. And their Facebook page doesn't have a phone number up yet. And so I've been looking for that, but you may want to check there for that phone number when they get it. But that's important, especially this time, because the Republicans they've done it before, and I think they're going to come out in force this time with their poll watchers who will stand right there behind the poll workers and look intimidating and attempt to question whatever they can.
They can't really do that. They have to stand back.
Yeah, well, that's true.
They can't talk to the voters.
Who do they talk to? Do they talk directly to the poll workers then?
They would have to talk to me as a judge that I challenge this person. And they have to know personally that that person's a felon, that he hasn't been naturalized yet, that he moved last week.
Okay.
Now, so they're kind of useless.
Yeah. Well, except for the intimidation factor.
Except for the intimidation, but they cannot talk to the voter.
Right.
And they can't eyeball, give them the stink eye.
So if we go to the polls and we see that happening, then we tell one of the judges or the chief judge.
Yes, usually you have a lead judge, and that person will be the one you would tell somebody. They'll tell the lead judge, and the lead judge will tell him what he's doing. Like you guys all heard about what happened in Virginia with Trumpers outside the poll places with their on voting, right? You guys heard this?
I heard something about it. But
what happened? Did they have guns or something, or what?
They were blocking the way. They were yelling and screaming, "Go Trump! Go Trump!" as the people were entering the polling areas, and that's trying to intimidate people.
And they were allowed to do it. They weren't.
There's police there. Didn't touch them.
No, that's not legal.
No, yeah, it's not.
In Minnesota, it isn't. I don't think it's legal in Virginia either. But
I think it's a federal thing. You can't,
Yeah.
first of all, and this is the least of the problems, you can't advertise any candidates on the ballot. Like, otherwise, I'd stand out my polling place just holding Jason Ruffalo for Minnesota sign all day. So you can't do that. And then, of course, you're blocking access to a public building, which is illegal. There's about 7 things they're doing wrong here legally. And then the moral side that expands exponentially.
I totally agree with you. And I don't know if they did it today again, but they did it on Friday.
And that's
And where did they do that?
Virginia.
In Virginia, Fairfax,
okay.
Virginia.
So inoculation is a technique that we can use to diffuse that a little bit. If I'm not expecting it and I go to a poll and see some guy with an AK-47 and a Trump hat, I might turn around. But if we let people also know when you're reminding them to get out the vote, not only whatever core message, but that don't let anybody intimidate you.
Mm-hmm.
You can expect to be intimidated. Here are your rights. And I know that the League of Women Voters sometimes puts information out that way.
I don't expect that kind of trouble in Minnesota. Maybe I'm just thinking Minnesota nice. I just not expecting it.
Well, and you do have to call if you see it. You have to say something. We went into our polling place in 2016, and there was a woman standing right at the door, one of the poll workers, saying, "Have your IDs ready?" And I said, "You can't be saying that." And she goes, "Well, people need IDs." I go, "No, they don't need IDs." And so I got on the phone. Who was it?
Devin Montero. He's our city clerk. I think
Called the city clerk, and the city clerk came down.
it happened like for me too. And we don't, when we were in normal voting and I was working and we didn't vote at the same time. And that happened to me too. And I also called our city clerk, and he went down there to talk to the judges to tell them they have to stop doing that.
Yeah, I know. I got called on that. I wasn't trying to do anything mean. It's just if I see the ID, it's so much easier for me. I look at the thing.
Yeah.
Problem is
done. But one of the lead judges heard me ask somebody, and they put a
That was
kibosh on
happening.
it.
That happened. I mean, like right after that election about voter ID, and that was when the iPads came out, at least in Brooklyn Park. And so it was easier. It was easier for the judges to like look at the ID, but I refuse to show mine because it's like my last name is Green with an E on the end. I mean, it's not hard. So I absolutely refuse to show my ID.
Well, I was told, and I have learned not to ask. And really, what they want, the only thing the judge really needs is the first 3 letters of both of your names.
Yeah.
And that's usually good enough to cut it down.
And some people will just show it just to make it easier for you. Yeah.
I fell into the habit of people were giving it to me. It was so much easier that way. Why not just ask? But I got cut off right away, and it was right. It was right to do that.
Yeah.
To correct me.
Yeah, the intimidation thing can be pretty big. I know. Just a story on that was our oldest son. He has a lot of social anxiety, and so going to vote, he asked me. This is early on, I think, maybe the first time he voted. He said, "Well, but because he had heard about these poll watchers. Well, what'll that poll watcher do to me?" And I go, "He can't do a thing to you, and we'll be with you." And it was just the fact that he even had to worry about that. It's just crazy. But the stories were there about what was being done.
So maybe this is a segue for a question, George. You talked about the psychology of getting out the vote. Every election, we say that we need to get out the youth vote.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a different psychology that works for the youth vote? And are we seeing anything different this election?
You know, that's a real interesting question. I have opinions, maybe not answers on that. We do have to get the youth vote out. We do have to study what it is, what messages resonate. And being like an old fart, coming from me is not necessarily what younger people are listening to. I think having young people talk to young people helps. And luckily, some young people do show up, certainly as staffers, but then also a lot of kids who are, at least in the summer, not in college, will come down and volunteer too. The more we can have millennials talking to millennials and young people talking to young people, the better off we'll be. Because I think there's the identification, if not necessarily my personal identity. I can identify with somebody my age. And the other thing that I think about millennials is that our messages will actually seem to resonate more with them, because they, as a group, my observation is they do not have built-in prejudice. They seem to be much more tolerant of people of different kinds, because they talk with people every day on the internet and interact with people they'll never meet, and who even in games they take on different, like their avatar may be totally different than they are, and they'll change their identities, and that's something that's normal for young people. So again, the hard part about young people is that they're young. Not that that's a bad thing, but they're going to college, or they're going off to their first jobs, they're starting families, and when you go to DFL meetings, you see there's the young staffers who are, maybe they're a law student doing this campaign work for this cycle, and then you see a bunch of, like a friend of mine said, looks like they emptied a box of Q-tips into the audience because everyone's got white hair. It's, That's the question for the ages. How can we get young people in there? And I think the messaging does change. Not sure I know what that messaging is right now. Now, obviously, they're humans, so a lot of the psychology we have here is going to work on them too. I don't know if that's a good answer or not. Well, it's 8 o'clock. You guys want to keep yapping, we'll yap, or we can hang it up and go for next week. What are we doing next week?
For candidates?
Oh, for candidates. Yeah, this one may be, this is going to be less framing than some things I think candidates need to know about how to present themselves, because if you know these things, your message will get across. The best example I can use is if you don't know how to use a microphone, nobody's going to hear you. So it doesn't matter how much framing you did. So we'll do some of that. So if you have some candidates who want to learn a few things that can help them, now and in the future, they're welcome to attend. Go ahead and invite them. Okay, well, everybody.
George, I had one comment. I go on all night on this stuff.
Me too.
We tend to use words, and are important. It's important the way we use words. And I found myself using this. We need to persuade the persuadables. Okay?
Yeah.
But there's something wrong for me with the word persuade. Because an old advertising guy said, I can never reason with you or persuade you of something. What I have to do is attract you to what I want. And by saying we've got to persuade the persuadables, we kind of put ourselves in this mindset of, let me give you the 5 arguments that you're going to talk about to get people to come out and vote.
Yeah.
And it's a psychological thing, but I've started saying, attract those in the middle, or you figure out some other expression there. It was just an observation. The other one was, I've been telling a lot of the climate organizations that I work with that they should be scheduling meetings for November 5th, 6th, and 7th. Given what happened in the last election, I know people that had to double their meds.
Yeah, we're warning.
And, I don't want to make it too facetious, but to some extent, if the election doesn't always go your way, you need to get people centered again and focused on what they can do, because yes, elections happen every year, every 2 years, and it's the stuff we do in between the elections that's really important. So
Yes.
either that or to celebrate But in terms of celebration, doesn't mean that the work is done. It means that you've got to go back out and start trying to put in place the policies that you want. So I just say, plan some meetings for right after the election. We might not know who the president is right away, but I know that everybody I know is very fearful of what the outcome might be. And it's worth talking about.
Win or lose. Yeah.
Win or
like,
lose.
Like
Right.
you say, because if we are celebrating, it just, it keeps people energized and say, okay, now that we've hit this milestone, now the real work begins. I'm with you on that. That makes sense. And I like that distinction between persuading and persuadables, and instead attracting people. That I hadn't heard that before. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense. And
Well, it's based partly on, I don't know, Ron asked the question earlier about what was everybody's take on Ruth, the Supreme Court, and that. To me, it's kind of a cliche to say we're involved in identity politics, but if we are involved in identity politics, the questions we should be asking are, how can we build our identity? What makes our identity more attractive than someone else's identity? And it isn't always, again, the reason or the policy issues, whether it's the Supreme Court. It is, if you look at the right, it is, what did your Trump guy do? He went and grabbed a flag. So he's got a visible symbol of his identity. Unfortunately, it happens to be kind of nationalistic. But people do things based on their identity, not on their intellectual capability anymore. So we need to figure out those things of how do we welcome people in? How do we reward them? How do we get them feeling positive about things? And that's why I'm suggesting, the after election part. I mean, people have election viewing parties and that sort of thing, but the party the week after, that's the important one for me.
Yeah, that actually for me was something that I know I've told the story, so I won't do it all again, but one of the young staffers back in 2004 got together all the volunteers she thought were the best, and she was like 20, and said, you're all going to become friends, you're going to take over the leadership positions in the DFL, you're going to run for office, you're going to join the activist organizations, and you're going to stay in touch with each other and be friends. And then she goes off to the jungle and for the Peace Corps, and emails us from the jungle and says, are you guys doing all the things I told you? And she came back a year and a half later, and we were everyone who was at that meeting, about 25, 30 people, all still together. We all became friends. We took over. We had party positions. Some ran for office. It was, but that happened right after the election. And I think that's a really interesting time to do it. It seems to be effective, at least anecdotally. So. Well, okay, folks, maybe we'll let you go, and
Bye, everybody. Have a good week.
We'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. ConnectionsLab.org